You think of the first explorers as people with ships and compasses. You imagine them carrying maps drawn by others who came before. But your own ancestors made journeys that dwarf those of any later age. They walked across continents before the first map was ever scratched into clay. How did they do it? How did humans spread from a single origin in Africa to every corner of the earth? The answer is not what you expect. It was not a planned migration. It was not a single great march. It was an accumulation of small steps, each one taken by someone like you who simply wanted to see what lay beyond the next ridge. You have to start in Africa. Around 200,000 years ago, your kind was not alone. There were other human species, Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and maybe others you have never found. But your ancestors were the ones who kept moving. They were the ones who followed the game, followed the seasons, followed the coastlines. Archaeologist Michael Petraglia has spent decades studying the earliest evidence of Homo sapiens outside Africa. At a site called Jebel Faya in the United Arab Emirates, his team found stone tools that are at least 125,000 years old. Those tools were made by people who had crossed the mouth of the Red Sea. You may wonder how they crossed. The sea level was lower then. The water was shallow enough to wade or to float on a simple raft of logs. They did not need an ocean liner. They needed only curiosity and a little luck. But that first group apparently did not push farther. They stayed in Arabia for thousands of years. The real expansion came later. Around 70,000 years ago, the climate changed. The seas dropped even further. Your ancestors looked at the horizon and saw something green. They walked into Arabia again, and this time they kept walking. You can picture it if you close your eyes. A small band of maybe 40 people, including children and elders, moving along a coastline that no longer exists. The map is different today. The Red Sea is wider. The Persian Gulf is flooded. But back then, the coast of Arabia stretched far to the east, and the shores of what is now Iran were only a short boat trip away. Your ancestors did not know they were leaving Africa. They did not know they were beginning a journey that would take their descendants to the ends of the planet. They just saw the tide pools full of crabs and the mangrove trees full of birds. They followed the food. This is a key point. Your ancestors did not have a destination, they had a direction. They moved toward resources and away from danger. They moved when the water dried up, when the herd moved on, when the season changed. The movement was slow. It was measured in generations, not in years. A family might advance only a few kilometers in a lifetime, but over 10,000 years, those small steps add up to an entire continent. Now consider Australia. You might think nobody could reach Australia without advanced navigation. But your ancestors arrived there at least 65,000 years ago. Archaeologist Chris Clarkson has excavated the site of Madjedbebe in northern Australia. He found stone axes, grinding stones, and ochre that date back to that time. The people who used those tools must have crossed open ocean. The shortest route from Sunda to Sahel required multiple sea voyages, each at least 50 kilometers of open water. They made it. They made it on rafts or boats that were nothing more than lashed bamboo or hollowed logs. How did they know where to go? They watched the birds, they watched the clouds, they watched the pattern of stars and the direction of the wind. Every island they reached was a new home, but also a launching point for the next invisible dot on the horizon. They did not fail. They succeeded every time. This is the counterintuitive twist you might not expect. Your ancestors were not just wandering aimlessly. They were skilled navigators. They read the environment like you read a street sign. They knew that the ocean current carried certain driftwood. They knew that the smoke from a campfire could be seen from 20 kilometers away. They knew that the birds returning to land at dusk meant an island was nearby. Their knowledge was not written down, but it was passed down through stories, through songs, through the careful naming of every bay and every reef. You can test this yourself. You have a brain that evolved for exactly this kind of spatial reasoning. When you drive to a new city without GPS, you rely on landmarks. You notice the shape of a mountain, the curve of a river, the color of a building. Your ancestors did the same, only on a scale of thousands of kilometers. They remembered the shape of a coastline from a story their grandmother told them. They recognized a constellation that had guided their grandfather across a strait, now moved to the Americas. You have heard about the Bering Land Bridge. You know that your ancestors crossed from Siberia to Alaska when the sea level dropped. But the story is more complex than that. The land bridge was not a bridge. It was a plain, a vast, cold, dry plain that stretched for over 1,000 kilometers, and it was not empty. It had rivers, lakes, and grass. It had mammoths and bison. Your ancestors lived there for thousands of years before they ever stepped into Alaska. They did not rush to fill the Americas. They lingered. Archaeologist Tom Dillihay excavated the site of Monte Verde in southern Chile. The evidence there shows that people were living in South America at least 14,500 years ago, that is hundreds of years earlier than the Clovis culture in North America. This means your ancestors did not follow a single route. They spread along the coast. They used boats to travel down the Pacific shore, stopping at every river mouth, every protected bay. They were not afraid of the water. They had been crossing water for at least 50,000 years before that, so how did they travel the world? They walked, they paddled, they sailed, they migrated, but the word migrate suggests a one-way trip. Your ancestors did not think of it that way. They moved back and forth with the seasons. They traded with neighboring groups. They exchanged obsidian, shells, and stories. The movement was a network, not a line. Modern humans did not conquer the world in a single wave. They did it in pulses. They did it in retreats. When the ice advanced, they moved south. When the ice retreated, they moved north again. The pattern is like breathing. Exhale outward, inhale inward, over and over for 100,000 years. Now look at yourself. You sit in a room with a screen in front of you. You can see satellite images of the entire planet. You can fly from New York to Tokyo in a day. You think you are different from your ancestors. You think you have surpassed them. But the same urge lives inside you. You want to see what is over the next ridge. You want to know what is on the other side of the ocean. You plan a trip. You book a flight. You board a plane, and when you land, you walk. You walk into a city you have never seen before. You follow the smell of food. You follow the sound of music. You follow a street that looks interesting. You do not have a map. You do not need one. You have your own eyes. You have your own memory. You have the same brain that guided your ancestors across continents. The world has changed. The distances have shrunk, but the way you move through it is still the same. You take a step. You look around. You take another step. And after enough steps, you have traveled farther than any ancient human could have imagined. You might think your ancestors never left home, but home was everywhere they walked.